You're here with lesson 3 in the basic section for basic U.S. personal income tax series. I'm Ginger Garvey, senior partner with Freedom Financial Partners, and welcome to this training video. Today we will be talking about the filing status. We'll talk about the purpose of the filing statuses as well as covering the 5 filing statuses and going through some examples, so hopefully this will be a little bit clearer to you. There are 5 filing status, and your filing status determines who has to file, so the filing requirements themselves, what tax rate will be used, whether you have a standard deduction. Your filing status will determine the amount of that standard deduction, as well as what tax form to use, and also if certain deductions and credits are possible. As you look at your deductions and credits, you will find out that they are allowed or disallowed for certain filing statuses. So your filing status is a very important thing to understand, and it's a good place to start, or in this case, it's going to finish up the basics section. So the next thing that we're going to do is talk about what are the 5 filing statuses. Single, most people are familiar with this. Married filing joint, most people are familiar with that as well. The next one is married filing separately. Married filing separately is what you use when you are legally married, but you're choosing to file your return without your spouse. Sometimes people come in and say, I'm married, but I want to file single. You're not married filing single, you're married filing separately. It's its own filing status. The next one is head of household. Head of household is a filing status that was created years ago because there are so many single parent households. So head of household does not indicate a person who's in charge of themselves, but it is specifically for someone who is supporting a household. So it's you plus at least one dependent. And that would be how a household is defined for this particular purposes for tax status. The last one, which many people are not familiar with, is there's a special tax status called qualifying widower with dependent child. And this is a filing status that is allowable for up to 2 years. You can file with this filing status for 2 years after the last year that you file jointly with your spouse in the event that your spouse is deceased. So this is the section on the 1040 where you would indicate what your filing status is. Again, single, married filing jointly, married filing separately, head of household, and qualifying widower. So the first one we're going to go through in a little bit more detail is single. You would use single as your filing status. In order to do that, one of the following must be true on the last day of the tax year. The first one is you've never been married, or you are at least unmarried on the last day of the tax year. The next is if you are divorced or legally separated under a separate maintenance decree on the last day of the tax year. Widowed before the first day of the tax year and not remarried during the tax year. So in that case, you were widowed before the first day of the tax year, so at least a year prior. And if you do not qualify for any other filing status, so if there's a reason why you can't file with one of the other filing statuses, the default filing status is single. The next one's married filing jointly. To file married filing jointly, you must have been married on the last day of the tax year. And that's it. Just if you were married on the last day of the tax year, you are allowed to choose married filing jointly. If your spouse died during any time during this tax year and you did not remarry, you may also file jointly. If you are living together in a common law marriage, so a common law marriage would be considered married on last day. Also, you can use the married filing jointly filing status. In order to do that, both individuals do not need to have income. So if only one of you is the breadwinner and the other one stays home and takes care of the household, you would still file married filing jointly in that instance. So here is a example question. Myrtle Wilson died on December 21st of 2016, and her wife Marcy did not work. They'd filed married filing jointly in previous years and they had no dependents. Marcy is not remarried. May Marcy file a joint return for 2016? And the answer here would be yes. Marcy may file a joint return in the year that her spouse dies. To use married filing separately as your filing status, any of the following may be true. You want to be responsible for your own taxes only. You do not want to have responsibility for your spouse's taxes. And you and your spouse do not agree on married filing jointly. So in that instance, you file with the married filing separate return. So again, the key points there are you do not agree to file jointly, and or you choose to be responsible for your taxes only. In order to file married filing separately, the way you fill out your 1040 is the red indicates the lines that have your information, and then the green, you would indicate only your spouse's social security number. You would not put your spouse's name on the return, just their social security number. And then you would indicate down in the filing section, you would check box 3 for married filing separately. Head of household. To use head of household as your filing status, you must be married or what we call considered unmarried as of the last day of the tax year. You have to have paid more than half the cost of keeping up the home for the tax year. And in most cases, you're going to need to have a qualifying person who lived with you in your home for more than half the year. Head of household, when we talk about more than half the cost of keeping up the home, the items that would be included in that would be the rent, mortgage interest, real estate taxes, home insurance, repairs, utilities, as well as any food that's consumed in the home. So all of those bills are considered part of the upkeep of the home. So in the event that one individual pays the rent and it's actually less than half of what is covered through the rest of the expenses of the household, then they would not be considered head of household. In fact, the other person would be considered to have been providing more than half of the cost of keeping up the home. The key thing here is that it does say more than half. So if it is split equally, neither of you pays more than half. So it's only if one of you is paying a little bit more, then that person would be able to or, you know, I mean, in some cases, the head of household, there's only one person and they're paying 100% of it. But in some instances where you do have two individuals and they're sharing the cost of the upkeep of the home, the one that is paying more than half would be the one that would be considered head of household. A qualifying person can be an unmarried child or a married child, a relative who is your dependent, or a parent who's not living with you. So this table is out of the publication 17, and it clearly states who you can use as your qualifying person for head of household. So that main thing is, if it's a qualifying child, then the person's a qualifying person. Whether if they're single, they're definitely a qualifying person. If they're married and you can claim them as an exemption, they would still be a qualifying person. If they're married but you cannot claim them because someone else is claiming them, then they are not a qualifying person for you. If someone is a qualifying relative and they're your mother or father, if you can claim the exemption, they would be a qualifying person for head of household as well. Qualifying relative other than your father or mother, they have to have lived with you for more than half the year and be related to you. And if you are claiming the exemption, then they can be a qualifying person. If they did not live with you for more than half the year, they're not a qualifying person. And if they are not related to you closely, as we discussed in the last chapter, then they would not be a qualifying person. So whether you can claim them or not, they would not be a qualifying person. It must be that close relationship, and they have to have lived in your household. So we're going to go through several examples here just so that people can really understand. First one is Susie. Susie lives with Mark. They're not yet married. Mark fully supports Susie and her daughter, Mary. Can Mark be head of household? He has a dependent. His dependent can be Susie, and it possibly can be Mary as well. He cannot be head of household because he does not have that close relationship. Bill's son Sam lives with him. He's 19 and not a full-time student, and Sam earns $4,500 working part-time. Can Bill be head of household? In this instance, no, because Sam is not a qualifying dependent. So there's no qualifying dependent. Granny Smith allows her granddaughter Red and her great-granddaughter Golden to live with her. Red works and is not a dependent of Granny. Granny pays for all of the household expenses. Can Granny be head of household? The answer is yes, if Red agrees to allow her to claim Golden. Red may not be head of household because she doesn't support the household. So Red cannot be head of household even if she does claim Golden, and Granny can only be head of household if she does claim Golden. So whoever claims Golden is key, and then Red, since she does not provide more than half the cost of the upkeep, would not be able to be head of household. Dick and Jane have 2 children together and they share all their expenses. Can they each claim one child and be head of household if they equally support the household? In that case, no. They do have qualifying dependents. However, only one person can be head of household. And one of them would be head of household and the other one would just be single. Doris's husband died 5 years ago. Their son David attends boarding school but does not live with Doris. Can Doris claim head of household? And in this instance, David would be considered her dependent because it would be viewed as if he was on a temporary absence while he's away at school, and she would be head of household. Larry, Moe, and Curly support their father Joseph equally. They take turns using the exemption for Joseph and claim him as a dependent. Moe and Curly are married, so Larry wants to claim Joseph for the purposes of head of household. Can he do that? And the answer is sometimes. He has to pay more than half of of Joseph's household support. He can claim him as a dependent sometime, but he cannot claim him as a dependent because he's not paying more than half. If it said that Larry provides 50% and Moe, or 51%, and Moe provides 25 and Curly provides 24, in that case, Larry would be able to use him for head of household. And we talked about this thing called considered unmarried. You're considered unmarried when if you are still legally married, your divorce is not final. You can be considered unmarried and choose the head of household filing status only if all of the following are true. Number 1, you file a separate return. 2, you paid more than half the cost of keeping up the home for the tax year. Key, the spouse did not live in your home at any time during the last 6 months, so the separation has been in effect since before July and has not been interrupted. And your home is the main home for your child for more than half the year. And you must be able to claim the exemption for the child. So you have a child in your home, your spouse, even though you're still legally married, has not lived in the home in the last 6 months. In that case, you can claim head of household, even if you do not claim the exemption for the child. So here we're going to go through some examples. Jason and Joan have been separated since January 31st. Josie, their daughter, lives with Joan, who supplies over half the cost of keeping up the home. Joan is still legally married to Jason, but may be treated as considered unmarried and may be eligible to file as head of household. If Jason did not move out of the house until August 8th, would she be able to file head of household? In that instance, it would be no, because he did live in the house during the last 6 months. The last filing status that we're going to review is the qualifying widower with dependent child. So you can file using the qualifying widower filing status if you filed a joint return the year that your spouse died, and your spouse died in 2014 or 15, and you did not remarry before the end of 2016. So in 2014, it would be a joint return, 15 would be qualifying widower, 2016 would be qualifying widower. If your spouse died in 2015, you would also be able to be qualifying widower in 2016, assuming you did not remarry, as well as in 2017. And you must have a child or stepchild who is your dependent, and you have to have paid over half the cost of keeping up the home that is the main home for you and your dependent child. So what qualifying widower is it's a 2-year grace period where you continue to receive the majority of the benefits of married filing jointly, but it's very similar to the head of household. You do have to have that dependent living in your house. You would not be a qualifying widower simply because you lost your spouse. You would need the dependent child and to be paying more than half the cost of keeping up the home. John Brown died in 2015. He's survived by his wife Liz and son Andrew. Liz is not remarried and keeps up a home for Andrew. For 2015, she filed married and filing jointly. Is her filing status for 2016 head of household? No, she should use qualifying widowers, which has a few more advantages for her than the head of household filing status. Here's a little direct way of addressing same-sex married couples. If you have a same-sex spouse with whom you legally married in a state or foreign country that recognizes same-sex marriage, you and your spouse generally must use the married filing joint or married filing separate filing status, even if you and your spouse now live in a state that does not recognize same-sex marriage. So what they're saying here is that if you are in a same-sex marriage, just like people who are in heterosexual marriages, you don't get to choose your filing status. If you're legally married, you would use one of the two legally married filing statuses, either married filing jointly or married filing separately. And that is the way the federal government handles same-sex marriages. So I'm going to quickly go through these just as a wrap up. Single, unmarried as of December 31st, or legally separated, and you do not qualify for any other filing status. Single is your default filing status. Married filing jointly, married as of December 31st, you would include both incomes if there are two incomes. Both must sign and both are responsible for the payment of the tax and the receiving of the refund. Married filing separately, married as of December 31st, you would report only your own income. You would provide the name and social security number of the spouse. And the one other piece is if one of the spouses itemizes, the other spouse must itemize even if they don't have any specific things to itemize. And we'll cover that more in the chapter on standard deductions and itemizing. Qualifying widower with dependent child. You must have a dependent child. That's a key thing for the qualifying widower. You need to have paid over half the expenses of the house, and you've not remarried, and you may use the status for 2 years after the death of the spouse. The next one's head of household. Head of household, when you are actually single, all you need to do is pay more than half of the expenses and maintain the home for 6 months for a qualifying person. If you're head of household and you are choosing to be considered unmarried, you have to have lived apart from your spouse for at least the last 6 months of the year, as well as pay more than half the cost and have a dependent child. So if you're married, it must be a child. It cannot be a parent. If you are not married, in order to qualify for head of household, you may use a parent. And that concludes this course. It's based off of Publication 17, Chapter 2. We did reverse Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 as we lay out our course because I feel that it is it's key to understanding how the various dependents can be defined in order to understand the filing statuses. So please feel free to check us out at freedomfinancialpartnersllc.com. And thank you so much for watching. Likes and comments are always appreciated. Thank you.